and welcome everyone to this episode of Breakpoint. In this episode is the first part in a series of episodes that we'll be talking about CFPs. We will be talking about effective paper submissions for security conferences, and I've broken it down into a few parts so that you can get step-by-step breakup of how do you actually go about thinking from ideation to execution to actually submitting the paper and getting that selected and having a good chance at it. So in this first part of the CFP series, we will be talking about security conferences. First of all, for us to understand what kind of conferences are there, we'll understand a little bit about the CFP process itself, the call for papers process that these conferences have, and then we'll also look at what are the different types of papers. So there are many types of security conferences that we have today. You will see that generally most of the security conferences are focused on new research, new work that's happening in the area of information security, or many of us call it cybersecurity. And in this space, there are various domains. So it could be in any of those domains, but it should be relevant to security and security in the industry. Now, when we talk about information security, the papers and conferences could themselves be focused on specific areas. For example, you have product security, you have network security, you could have even IoT, hardware, physical security. It could be just risk and compliance, so regulatory requirements and hence security, and then so on and so forth. It's important to look at and understand where your passions lie and what aligns with what you want from the security conference before you even think of applying to the conference. All the conferences, they have a common goal, which is of course knowledge sharing, presenting your research, presenting the work that you have done till now as a researcher or even as a professional in the industry. And the other aspect is to meet people face to face, understand, their work, to be able to collaborate with them, to talk to them, and have a good network in security, so that you can not just collaborate but also help each other out from time to time and as and when you need. The other thing is, just like I was saying, the flavor of the conference. Now, flavor of the conference is not necessarily always the technical flavor, which means, for example, if you have a security conference, it's not necessary that the flavor would only be, for example, some conferences like hardware.io is focused on hardware and research around hardware security. But that's not the case for all the other conferences. But even then, there is a theme that runs, which is something nobody would tell you about, which is generally understood, and it is what the conference really holds high in their in their area. Like, for example, what kind of research it would like to promote versus others. So I'll give an example. If it is completely something around governance, risk, and compliance, generally any research in regulatory requirements or data security and all of these allied privacy and all of these allied topics would be something it would hold very high. There's another conference, for example, All Day DevOps. This is not a security conference, but it's completely focused on DevOps, and hence DevSecOps automatically becomes a part of it. A paper which is looking into DevSecOps might get higher preference than something which is talking about some firmware security somewhere in remote IoT device somewhere. So every conference comes with its own flavor, and it's good to check that out when your area of research belongs to a specific niche. Also look at the audience. For most or many of these conferences, we have specialized audience in the sense that there's a certain group, a certain cult, especially many of these conferences have, that have a specific bent of mind. Many times when we are selecting research, one over the other, we often also prefer the key takeaways for the audience of our conference. because there's a certain audience that comes in. For example, if it's security professionals, they are looking for information around not just offensive security research, but also defensive security research and similar areas, right? So you have to look at these kind of things as well. So that gives you an idea of what will be relevant to the conference and to the audience. Also look at the past speaker lineup, the kind of talks which are there, the topic trends which are there, of course, what's trending in the industry, what makes sense from a technology standpoint, what is it that is changing as of today. All of that will make sense when you're looking at a conference and applying to it. There are also some conferences where you have a company focused conference where the company itself is organizing a conference, and they would also have some research around their own products. Some of these cloud providers, public cloud providers, for example, AWS has a conference called reInvent. Similarly, many others also they come up with their own conferences. Some of them are really good, really valuable, good research that's being presented in those. And there are others which are industry-wide conferences where, for example, Black Hat or DEF CON, you have NullCon, all of these other conferences, global, some of them regional, which are mostly focused on industry-wide areas of relevance. Once you've identified the conferences that there will always be a call for papers before the conference actually starts. So few months before the conference, and generally in a known span of time, you will have the call for papers for the conference where they will invite talks from various researchers in the industry in specific domains, in specific areas. All of that is listed. I have given some samples here just to show you all the conferences have CFPs. One thing, you may need to track it. You will need to track it initially to be able to know when the CFP is open, meaning that they have started accepting papers and research in your area, in specific security areas. Go ahead, check out the CFP pages, understand the dates. First of all, when is it open, for what period duration, when does it close, what kind of notifications will be sent or not, what kind of data needs to be provided, what are the domains and tracks which are allowed at the conference, what is it that they're accepting, and stuff like that. And you will also know where the conference will happen, the venue and all of the logistics you need to be aware of. Now, it's also a good thing to check out the tracks at the conference at this time, because the tracks will tell you what are the different. So while you have maybe 10 different areas, you may have 4 different tracks, or you may have 3 different tracks which are focused on. Generally, there is always a primary track where you have your primary talks, authentic research, you have briefings or others that's being presented by the speakers. And then there are multiple other tracks which are there. These tracks are essentially focused on specific technologies or kind of work. For example, there's a developer track, as you can see here. So developer track is focused on developer specific niches, where you're talking about mostly on the side of websites, applications, building them, breaking them in a specific way. You're talking about product security, and you're talking about areas which impact the developer's work. Similarly, you have others like Bounty Craft. In this case, I'm just taking an example from NullCon. These are present in many other conferences as well, where you are showcasing the bug bounty results that you have as a bug hunter. Okay, so you can go ahead and apply to these specific for these specific tracks as well. Generally, if your work and research is, of course, authentic and aligns with these tracks, these will actually be generally moved to these specific tracks, so that all similar kind of work can be focused on specific tracks. Then you have other tracks as well. Generally, there is also tool track in many conferences, where you have specific tools that you have created can be presented. You can talk about it in those tool tracks which are present. Lastly, we look at the type of papers. Now, when you know about the conference, and generally the idea is that you start with paper first, and then towards the end you come down to which conferences you want to apply. Many times though it happens that we are all familiar with the conferences, and then we start doing some research and come back to the actual paper writing. Long before writing the paper, you need to be looking at what is the area of research that you're thinking of. Now, there are many new technologies coming up. We'll talk in more detail about the ideation side of things in the coming series, but it's important to know that will determine what is the kind of paper that you're writing. So I've generally divided into very simply into two parts. You have research papers, and then you have your experience papers. Now, there are other kind of papers as well. Research papers, or academic papers as I would call it, is more around something new that you have discovered, found out, or you have done some kind of innovation, even some kind of disruption in a way that things work, whether it is in terms of attack, in terms of defense, in terms of adding some controls or anything like that. So that innovation comes out in with respect to the research papers. These could be, for example, new attacks, new technique that you have come up with, new approach to solving some specific security problem or some specific attack. So there is a new approach that you've come up with. It could also be, for example, in the area of exploit development, new kind of exploits that you're coming up with, and or even security frameworks. It could be in any domain, in fact. And for example, it could be system security, it could be OS security, it could be firmware security, hardware, IoT, it could be in any domain. The idea is there is something new that you have discovered which others have not, or you have found out which others have not. And this could build upon top of other work that exists. So you could be building on top of that, but there is generally and always there is a delta that you have added. So there is something new that you have found and discovered. This is the best kind of research in the sense that it's pretty authentic. It would be your original work if you have found it, and it would definitely be given a lot of preference in any of these conferences. The other is experience papers. It's more on the side of applied security, where, for example, if you're a security professional, you're helping out or in the research or even the security teams of any other company, irrespective of your designation, you have been able to improve security and or defensive or even offensive security in any way. Many times it is in a quantifiable manner where you can actually do the implementation, do the POCs, show the result, and you are able to actually bring in some new approach, some new technique to be able to solve specific security problems that we have in the industry. For example, it could be improving the attack strategy or attack strategy at scale because you are in an enterprise. It could be improving testing automation for security in general. You could be looking at scaled up DevSecOps, so all of these things. There are various papers that have been presented because everybody is trying to solve it differently, and hence these new techniques can be submitted as your work as well. Securing any new kind of technology. So technology comes in while in offensive security, you'd think of how do we attack, how do we set this up and attack it. We'll also be thinking of how do we defend and control this. So all of those techniques will come into play. You will also have some very disruptive cultural and security programs, for example, that you run, or you run them at scale and you've been able to see and simplify the process or templatize the process in a way that works at scale. And those kind of things can also be presented and will be considered as your work. Of course, that also applies to all kind of security automation. So understand that with respect to whatever work that you bring forth with respect to being in the industry or being on the defensive side, it's always better to have something demonstrable, something practical, something quantifiable in terms of the numbers that you have as a result of, for example, having run the programs, and what is it that you have seen in terms of actual numbers. If you were able to achieve security in a quantifiable manner, it is much better. If it is automation, it really helps, of course, to have the POCs in place, but also be able to have it in a way that can be a good takeaway for the rest of the industry. So you could have tool releases, you can have open source tools, you can have scripts, hem charts, a lot of these other things where you can share all of that with the rest of the community as a part of your research. So these are the two different kind of papers. There are others as well. I'm just talking about primarily these two for us to understand and see what our area of research aligns with more in terms of what you are working on as a researcher. That's all for this video. I'll see you all in the next one. Until then, bye-bye.